Hello, my name is Sophia Galvin. I'm the founder of the Rainbow Redemption Project, which is a Christ centered resource for detransitioners. I'm a detransitioner myself, and I began to transition to become a man when I was 17 and a half. I detransitioned when I was 20, and when I was 21, I received Jesus and I gave my life to him. So, the point of this video is to give my story in a way that's not to appease an agenda, that's not to appease any individual person, but to share from the heart my experiences and what God has done in my life. So, to begin, I was born and raised in Miami in a Cuban family, very Cuban culture. I'm half Cuban actually, but that was the environment that I was raised in. Very conservative environment as well. So when it came to being a young girl, it was challenging from the things that I saw around me. A lot of what I saw was women being abused and women getting put down and women feeling like they didn't have a voice. And I guess I always kind of had this sense of boldness within me, relatively speaking, of course, and a desire to point out injustice where it is. But I felt like as a woman, I couldn't really do that, or I guess you could say as a young girl from what I saw around me. I did dress a bit as a tomboy as a child. I believe this was also due to some traumatic things which happened to me, which I don't really want to get into, but basically these traumatic things made me feel very uncomfortable in my body and in myself and expressing my femininity. I also struggled with same-sex attraction a lot, which made me hate myself because when I was around girls, I would feel the attraction and I would feel immediately that it was wrong, but it's like there was no escape from it. So I internalized that as well. And so that was my childhood. That was elementary school for me. Middle school was interesting. I went to an all girls school and it was very challenging for me because of the same sex attraction that I felt. I was only around girls, especially going through puberty with all of those hormones that were flowing through me. The attraction started to become more pervasive, I guess you could say. And, you know, of course women are very touchy, so I would be around women and women would be touchy with me, well, young girls, and I felt kind of like I had to put on this show of like, oh, I'm actually not attracted, if that makes sense. Um, I had to hide this. I had to pretend like it wasn't something that I was struggling with, even though in my family it wasn't necessarily something that was wrong, but something within me, I knew that there was something wrong with it. And so I kept silent about it for a very long time. But it came to a point where it was like it was boiling up, and I felt like I couldn't be quiet anymore. I was very tormented with the guilt and the shame that I felt surrounding it. And so I remember one night, you know, crying out to God. It's like, God, please take this away from me. I don't want to be gay. If there's any other way, please show me. And I felt like he didn't answer me. And I even looked online trying to, find, am I actually gay? Or is this just like hormones? Or am I just comparing myself to other women? Because I do believe that that was it to a certain extent. I compared myself a lot to the women around me. Um, but that's kind of what I was experiencing at, 13 and then going on into high school. I ended up coming out when I was 14, and it was pretty well received by my peers at the time. I think that a lot of it was the fact that I was very feminine, so they didn't necessarily feel like I was going to be predatory or prey on them, which was my fear that it would affect my friendships that I had. But it didn't, thankfully. But at that point was when I really began to strongly believe in the LGBT policies that they were fighting for at the time, like speaking about LGBT topics in school and such things. I really was feeling that, especially with all of the clashes and the social justice movements going on at the time, because that's when I was 14 years old. So that was back like in 2014. Um, I was really feeling that of what I struggled with when I was young, the shame and the guilt and the condemnation. I didn't want other people to experience that. But as I started to become more entrenched in the community, the greater, I would say, I began to become indoctrinated and eventually, come out as trans. Of course, that wasn't the only thing, though. I was, of course, developing, as all young girls do, and especially growing up in Miami, I was preyed on a lot because of the way that I looked. I was, tall, and I was a pretty girl. So that was also something else that made me feel very uncomfortable in my body, and it made me feel like I had no value. And I, again, didn't know how to even speak up for myself when these things would happen, because I always had this fear within me that there would be negative repercussions to me actually standing up for myself, because I never saw it around me, and I was never able to stand up for myself in certain toxic situations that I had been in before. As well as I struggled a lot with my mental health. When I was 15, I started cutting myself. When I was 16, I went to therapy and I got on psychiatric medication. It was pretty bad. There were times where I would have to go to the hospital because my anxiety was so high. The panic attacks were so bad that I felt like I couldn't control them. I was in a lot of torment. Also, school was very stressful because it was pushed on me to achieve a lot. I felt like this really heavy weight on my shoulder, always, on all fronts. And I felt all of this torment that I couldn't escape. I really don't know how I got through that time, or most of my life. Of course, now I know it's God. But that's kind of everything that was boiling up in my life up to that point, 16, 17. So when I turned 17, I became the president of the LGBT club at my school. Things seemed really good for me because I had a high GPA. I was most likely getting a full scholarship to school. Of course, internally, I was struggling with a lot. But on the outside, it seemed like everything in my life was good and together. And then I had a girlfriend at that point, which I found very confusing because I didn't understand, like, what roles are we supposed to play? Like, this doesn't really make sense to me. And then especially, like, when we would go out in public and be preyed on, I felt like I had to take on the protector role. And so these things kind of made me feel like I had to masculinize myself and be the man, I guess you could say. And so I started to take on that identity. And that's really when the dysphoria, I would say, fully manifested itself, from, like, hating myself, being depressed, being anxious, hating my body, kind of came together into gender dysphoria. And I began to want to be a man. So that's kind of how it started for me. I wasn't fully sure about it at the beginning. I remember looking up on the internet, like the American Psychological Association, what the diagnostic criteria was. And so because the criteria was so vague, I was able to automatically see it and be like, yeah, well, this is what I'm struggling with, because what it says on the American Psychological Association website is that I am gender dysphoric, and if I have gender dysphoria, I must be trans. But I still, in my heart, wanted another way out. So I remember one night I was in my room and I cried. I remember I cried all night. And I did just as I did when I was 14, when I was coming out as gay. I said, God, please, if there's another way, show me another way, because I don't want to do this. But again, I felt like I had no answer. And so I ended up coming out and I dove right in. So this was in around 17 and a half when I made the decision to dive in, I started socially transitioning, which means that I started dressing as the opposite sex, and I started flattening my breasts and everything to give myself the appearance of a man. I ended up socially transitioning. And then when I was 18, I started medically transitioning. Right when I turned 18, I got my hormones from Planned Parenthood. And like I said, on the outside, it seemed like my life was going really well. I was going to school, I was working, I had a full scholarship to school. But on the inside, I was about to break. And, I was very quick with the name change. I was very quick with the testosterone. And the impact that the testosterone had on me, I mean, it just knocked me down. The little bit of strength that I had to move forward every day, it was completely gone from me. I didn't do well that semester in school. I started getting into drugs and just having all of this anger, and I just started becoming a different person. And so at that point, at the end of the semester, or the beginning of the next semester, around January of that year, my ex-girlfriend broke up with me. And so in the midst of the breakup and, school being very stressful and other personal things I was going through, and the testosterone, the horrible impacts that was having on me, I broke down. And so I started sleeping around with men. And eventually, like a month later, I was raped. So this was like February 2019, my spring semester of my freshman year. And that was the ultimate thing that just, I couldn't continue in my life the way that I had before for years, kind of being able to carry myself through. I had to stop. So I stopped school at that point and I started working full time. But eventually, over like the course of a year, so like this is around 19 years old, I even had to quit working because that's how mentally and emotionally afflicted I was. And also physically, to be frank and to be honest, I had a lot lower energy and my life was a mess. I guess that's the best thing I could say. I became addicted to sex, further addicted to drugs. At some point, I went to a psychiatrist and to a mental health professional again, trying to receive help. They put me on pills, of course, and therapy. That didn't help me. And so, after being on the testosterone for about a year, I had my breast removed. I remember after the surgery looking in the mirror and thinking, this did not help me. That was probably the lowest point in my life. Well, one of the lowest. There were a lot of low points. I just kept going, continuing in the negative behavior and the negative patterns. And eventually, when COVID hit, I began to really think and reflect on my life. This is at 20 years old. Is the testosterone good for me? Is this actually helping me? I kind of miss being feminine. Like, I would have these thoughts and these feelings that it was hard to vocalize because it's like, well, how am I supposed to admit that I just made a huge mistake taking testosterone for 2 years and removing my breasts? How is that something that I can just openly admit after I led everyone to believe that this is who I am beyond a shadow of a doubt? So I was struggling with that internally, but it came to a point for me where I was just like, I can't live like this anymore. So I stopped the testosterone. That was very challenging because I quit cold turkey and my hormones were all over the place. And of course, having to deal with all the trauma that I had been through in my childhood, all of the trauma that I went through over the last few years because I was living fast, not even thinking about the things that I was doing, just trying to get through the day. I had to deal with all of that on top of mourn the body that I used to hate, but now missed and wish I could go back to. So it was very challenging. Of course, it was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. I was actually Baker acted around that time, like a month or two after I made that decision. I was forcibly put into a mental hospital. I started cutting myself again. At that point, I didn't know what else to do with my life, because it's like, for so many years, all I wanted was just to feel full and to feel loved and to feel like there was a purpose to my life. And I chased after it. I chased after it in the wrong ways, but I genuinely, I was trying in the only way that I knew how. Nothing to no end. And so, not knowing what else I could do, like I had done quite a few times in my life, I laid down in my bed, I looked up, and I said, God, please help me. I can't do this anymore. And I had no reason to think that God would answer me or to even believe that he was real, but something in my heart just felt like only God could help me. And so I ended up, like, it was about a month later, there was another girl who was a detransitioner. She talked to me about Jesus. And I had thought about and considered many other spiritual paths, I guess you could say, but they didn't make me feel whole, and they didn't really give me what I was looking for. But when she started talking to me about like having a relationship with Jesus, it was something that I hadn't heard before. And something in my heart just really, it resonated with me. And so Jesus and pursuing him and finding out if he was real and the truth became the center of my life for the next few months. So this is about at the end of 20 years old, maybe just turning 21. And it was challenging because there were people in my life who did not agree or support my decision to pursue Jesus. But despite that, I had to, because to me it was like, if Jesus isn't real, there's no other point to me even existing. It's just, again, something in me that longed just to know. And so, of course, I'm getting to know him. I'm having all of these crazy coincidences and things that keep happening to me. I have just moments where I would feel the Holy Spirit just come over me, and I would feel his love. I would start crying, because it's just like he was breaking through that lie that was placed in my head that he hated me. Because I struggled with being LGBT and all of these things, that lie, I think it was, out of everything I had been through, that was the worst thing, is the belief that God hated me. And over those few months, he broke that down. And eventually I ended up giving my life to him, which was the best decision I ever made, for sure. And now I'm at a point, where I can never deny his existence. He's done so much for me just over the last year and a half-ish. I was on psychiatric medication, which I wanted desperately to get off of. And he helped me get off of it. I was unemployed. I could barely make myself breakfast in the morning. And now I'm going back to school and I'm running an organization all by his spirit. He's completely changed my life. He's changed my mind. He's changed my emotions. He's changed the way that I see others. How I can even love people when they hate me. It's just so amazing what he has done in my life. And so that's my testimony. The testimony of how God has changed me. Whoever you are watching this, I know that it's not for no reason. I want you to know that God loves you, that if you come to God just as you are, that he will do the work in you and he will transform you. And anything else that you may need to let go of, he'll work on it with you. What he wants above all is your heart. So I hope that this helps you. I hope that this brings light to you. I hope that if you've been wondering whether or not God is real, that this be a sign to you that yes, God is real, Jesus is real, and above all, that he loves you so much, so much. If you would like to find out more about the organization Rainbow Redemption Project, please visit our website, rainbowredemptionproject.com. Please subscribe, please donate, and you can also contact us on that webpage if you have any questions. Also, follow us on social media on Instagram at Rainbow Redemption P, and you can follow me on Twitter at Sophie Speaks. It's Sophie PH with 2 E's and Speaks with 2 S's. Thank you, and please have a great day.